I was reading something about Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett is one of the top 3 wealthiest men in the world. And an interesting fact was that 86% of his wealth was created after the age of 60. So when most people go on to a pension age, he made 86% of his wealth by then. And Ian's talk today is, you may be too young to start a business, but you are really too old. Really, not really, but really too old. And the focus is on when you passed your 60s, maybe that's the best opportunity and best time to make your life. And they say that life starts at 40. But I think Ian has the focus of your business life restarts again at 60. And he's going to share his experience and some of the knowledge that he has with it. If I look at Ian's life, it's really 3 main phases. The first phase was growing up and teaching and education and Jewish education. And he spent, he was director of Jewish education at Herzliya in Cape Town. And it's interesting, when I mentioned to somebody, put on a group, I'm doing this interview, I got quite a few people coming back. Yes, he was my Hebrew, my Jewish studies teacher. So it's interesting. A lot of people know Ian from phase 1 of his life. A lot more people know him from phase 2 of his life. He started doing training and consulting. Gateway Business Consulting is consulting in strategy. And so he takes a lot of time in helping companies through that. And the third phase, which he'll discuss a little bit with you today as well, is he's now investing in a couple of startup businesses. And if you think, for me personally, when I think of Ian, the first image that comes to mind is just books. He's the only person I know who, let's look at it this way. Most people, or you might hear of some people who are smart and know a lot of information, and you call them a walking encyclopedia. I look at Ian and I think of him as a walking library, not just an encyclopedia. Ian has read over 700 business books, not only read them, but he's reviewed them. He's written a review on each one of those books. So that's kind of the image that comes to mind. And I met Ian many years ago in his office, and it was literally like a library with the catalogs. He now looks at most of these books or reads them online, electronically, but he goes through a book a week, and he spends about 1.5 hours every single day dedicated to reading a book. So as I said, he's read over 700 of these books. Ian as well has written 3 books. These are the books that he's written himself. It's Managing with Intent, Strategy That Works, and the Executive Update. And Ian's Executive Update is some of the reviews of other books. So Ian, I'd like for us just to get to know a little bit about yourself. And then if you can just share kind of the lessons that you've learned from the 700 books and things that we should know about really starting life afresh when we, let's say, later on in life. So if I can just ask you, maybe let's start at the beginning. How did you get into education? What was it like? And was that a stepping stone to where you are now? Or did you break away completely from that to where you are now? So
that's a very interesting question. I think that I grew up in the 60s. In the 60s, there wasn't anything odd about saying, I want to do good in the world and I want to be a school teacher, I want to be an historian, wherever it was. And people I think that was a perfectly legitimate thing for people to be doing. And I was caught up in all of that. And I felt I always wanted to be a teacher. So I started out my university education doing a BCom. And about the same time, I was also studying in yeshiva. I spent 5 years in the seminary. And in the second year, I did the 2 things concurrently. So I studied in the seminary because I was in Israel, so nobody knew you weren't supposed to be registered to universities. But being out the country, it didn't seem to matter. And then in the second year, I realized that I thought there were what big business really needed was not another businessman. They needed more philosophers. So I'd majored in philosophy. In my first year, I did a lot of philosophy and English. And after that, I figured the best thing I could do was to study philosophy. So I got my honors in philosophy, general philosophy. whilst I was studying what's essentially medieval Jewish philosophy in the yeshiva. My intention all the time was to teach people. I really enjoy sharing ideas with people. So it's something that it was a passion. It wasn't passion. It was just like, to me, it was absolutely obvious. And I spent 17 glorious years, doing what I enjoyed most. I remember friends saying to me, don't you want to go into business and make some real money? And I said to them, what would I do with it if I did make a lot of real money? And they said, well, you could have stuff. You could like really enjoy yourself. And I said, well, I can't imagine enjoying myself more. So I realized it's in exactly the right place. After about 17 years in education, I started at the bottom when I was a part-time teacher, and I worked my way up and eventually landed up as the director of the Herzliya schools, which in those days was I think we had about 2,000 students in the group, and we had 5 campuses. And that was my last assignment. And when I decided that it's time that I went into something else, and something else was consulting, it came very naturally. It was quite obvious. And I remember going to what I always would do when I had any major issue. I would go and discuss it with my father, who was an extraordinarily clever man. And it usually was he was an advocate. So discussing anything with him usually was an interrogation. You were on the witness stand. The odd thing about this time is when I said to him, I'm thinking of going into consulting, he said, good idea. That was it. I thought that wasn't what I was looking for. I went to the school psychologist, who was part of the team. I said to her, I'm looking for a psychologist I can talk to, but I don't want somebody who's going to interrogate why I didn't bond with my mother, that sort of stuff. I said, I've got a simple question. I need somebody to ask me really hard questions as to why it is I'm changing from education to consulting. And she found me a good cognitive psychologist, and him and I spent maybe an hour or two together. And at the end of it, he said, you haven't changed your career at all. You're just changing context. And I think it was absolutely right. I changed from teaching high school and young adults to working exclusively with adults in a different context. So that's how I landed up in the business.
So was it important for you that aha moment of changing context? It feels like that kind of made it okay for you.
I think a lot of things that happen in the real world happen through existential crises. My existential crisis was a breakdown in my family. I got divorced at the time, and it was one of those things where I figured, can I stay in the position I was? And at the time, it was very, very uncomfortable for me to do that. I felt uncomfortable. I don't know if anybody even noticed. I felt very uncomfortable, and so I thought I needed to change to something. And this was the next thing that had appealed to me. During the time I was working at Herzliya, I also I was always giving talks to business people. I remember the first time I realized that consulting could be a profession was when a neighbor of mine, I was telling him that I was quite excited about this idea of the psychology of self-discipline. And he said, oh, you must come and talk to us. I said, that'd be great. So he invited me to talk to a group of people from Liberty Life at one of their sessions over a bunch of people, and I spoke to them over lunch. And it was a good session. I enjoyed myself a lot. I think that they did too. And then something remarkable happened. He sent me a check. Now, if you've ever worked in the Jewish community, you're constantly asked to give talks on everything, but nobody ever sends you a check. If you're lucky, you get a JNF trees or a book or something, or a nice letter, but nobody sends checks. And it was like, one sec, people pay for this stuff. And the other thing was, and subsequent to that, quite often I found myself being invited by members of the board of trustees to talk with their staff or to talk with them about business issues. So the transition wasn't radical. It was almost smooth transition from one context into another context, and that's how that began.
So just a question: what is a check?
Let me just tell you this: most countries go through start of obviously as cash economies, and then they develop into a check economy, and finally they develop into an electronic with credit cards. when Czechoslovakia stopped being part of the Soviet Union, they moved from a cashless society into directly, because it was an educated and sophisticated society, directly into credit cards. So there, in fact, were no Czechs in Czechoslovakia.
Wow, that's like a nice story. So Ian, you started doing these talks, and it obviously based on the fact that you'd been reading a lot of books. Just please go through the story of how did you start reading the books, and how did it evolve into you writing reviews about it, and how then talking about it. And now that you've, I don't know, do you know the exact number, but I believe it's over 700 books that you've now read. Just take us through that.
I'll tell you.
And some of the, maybe as we go through this, just some of the lessons that stand out for you from some of the books that you've read.
Sure. The book reading thing, I was quite good at studying, not at school. I was the kid who got matric by reading what in the olden days used to call Cole's notes. So you'd have like Shakespeare in 18 pages and how to answer the questions. I was that kid. So I never really did a lot of studying at school. It seemed like after school I enjoyed it. I started enjoying it a lot. And now what happened was I was now leaving education. And whilst I was in education, I literally was able to do 2 degrees at the same time. But when I left education, I realized I don't know terribly much about this stuff. And the only thing I knew how to do was essentially to outread people. So a friend of mine, and everything in my life is, well, it depends what your orientation is. If you're religious, you'd say, this is the Lord guiding me. If not, you'd say it's serendipity. Or if you might see it as anything else, so just pure luck. A friend of mine was working in a bookshop, and they just opened up. And he said to me, I'd love to introduce you to my manager. So I met the manager. I said to him, listen, if you're prepared to lend me books on business, I'll invite people that I know to breakfast. We'll have a group of people, and I'll review the books for them, and then they'll know to buy them from you. I said, help yourself. So that was fantastic. I was involved with Kessel Feinstein, they were called in those days. And I invited their clients, the HR lady, or whoever it was who's organizing this, would invite their clients and all the partners to breakfast. I would stand up in the front and I'd read books. I'd tell them about books I'd read. And that got me into having these business book breakfasts, which I did for probably about 18 years, I think. Maybe it was a little less than about 15 years. We did them every month, February through November. And I got to meeting a lot of people, and also got to initially free books. After a while, where his bookshop collapsed, so they went. And after that, I probably had to buy a lot of the books myself, and still buying them. But I would review them each month for people. And then somehow or other, serendipity again. We're having dinner with a guy called John Matham. Him and his wife are friends with my wife. And John said he's just got a job working on AM Live on SABC. And I said to him, I'd been reviewing books. And so that's a good idea. We must do that. Next thing, I got a call from his presenter saying, would you like to review books on radio? And I always felt I've had a face for radio. So I started reviewing books on radio. As a result of that, there was a short stint when I used to review books for CNBC Africa and occasionally on SABC Morning Live. So I got into that whole thing. And about the same time, I got a call from Sunday Times saying, would you write columns for us? I thought, well, I read anyway. It's not a big deal. I'll just write it. And I always enjoyed writing. I'd written poetry, but never written reviews of books. But there's something special about writing a review. I mean, because when I was preparing for a talk, you're actually doing a review. So you're taking it, but crafting a beautiful piece that reads easily and gets your point across is an art form which you could actually get your teeth into. So I started doing that, and I wrote for the Sunday Times, and then now I write for Fin24.
Okay, and were you given a check for this? Or did you? because I know the talks that you've been, and the reason I asked, the talks that you gave, and I attended a few of them, they were almost like they were free talks you were just paying for your breakfast. So it feels like a lot of what you do wasn't motivated by money.
No, you're quite right. We always tried to cover costs, which we often did, but not always, over the breakfast. And the newspapers initially used to pay, I believe, like 2 rand a word, which turned out to be 2,000 rand for a piece. But to write a piece, it takes me still today, and I know the field, so I can read faster. It takes me about anywhere between 10 and 13 hours to read a book. I read it thoroughly. Then what you've got to do afterwards is you've got to say, well, the book is big, and a lot of the stuff they're saying I've heard before, and it's not terribly interesting. And some parts are absolutely fascinating. Let me take all the fascinating parts and turn them into a piece. And that's another 3.5 hours. So you figure you're probably spending easy 15 hours a week doing that stuff. For 2,000 rand, that it doesn't make any sense. So I stopped bothering about sending the invoices. In fact, I couldn't buy the pleasure that I got out of it, and I couldn't buy the name recognition I also got out of it. It was probably because of that I got involved with Bruce Whitfield. I think I've been on his show for virtually since he got the Money Show. As long as he's had it, I've been there once a week talking about business books. So if I'd gone to an advertising agency and said, I'd like to get on Bruce Whitfield's show once a month at the right time to talk to business people, how much would that cost me? And it would have broken the bank. So all in all, this has turned out to be a lucrative business opportunity.
Fantastic. And just some of the lessons that you've learned from the book. So I know recently you shared a story with some people at ORT about picking babies off a river and going upstream. And I thought it was an unbelievable business story. So if maybe you can talk us through that particular story, and then
Sure.
any other gems like that kind of illustrate, that you picked up from the books over the years, that illustrate the in-depth thinking that this, I thought it was a lovely story, if you wouldn't mind sharing it with us.
Gladly. The book was written by Dan Heath. There were 2 brothers called Dan and somebody else Heath, and Heath and Heath. And Heath and Heath, one brother is a professor, the other one is a curriculum developer. And they at some point got together and started writing books, and they write very, very well together. They've written, I think there are about 3 or 4 books that they've written. There's some which are incredibly clever. This particular book was called Upstream. And what they were saying is that we tend to focus on the here and now. So when there's a problem anywhere in your life or anything else, we say, what's the problem? How can I immediately solve it? And there you are, and you put a lot of effort into trying to solve it. He said, try and imagine, this is the image he uses. Imagine that you're bathing with a friend at a river. And all of a sudden you see a little child coming downstream without a life raft. And the child's clearly out of control. And you dive into the water, you grab the kid, and you take the child and you put her on the bank. And as you look behind you, then another child's coming down. And now your friend jumps in, and another child coming down, 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 kids. And at one point you notice that your friend has jumped out the river and he's running. And you say, what are you doing? What are you doing? Come help here. He said, no, I'm going upstream to find out who's throwing these kids in. And I think that very, very often when we're faced with problems, we don't say, what is the upstream problem? Well, where did it all start? What caused the stuff that we're experiencing now? And their whole analysis was, how do you go out analyzing, whether it's a social situation or business situation? How do you analyze more accurately? Because you go upstream to look at causes as opposed to spending your time looking at effects.
It's fantastic. And I think this relates to what you're saying, where although you weren't paid for a lot of the stuff that you're doing and on Bruce Whitfield's show, your success is kind of the downstream of this, that you benefited from this.
Yeah, enormously. Yeah.
And being on the show and reading the books, is it pressure on you or does it give you unbelievable insights? And do you think you read more because you have to read more? You're almost like forced to read it now.
I think that I'm for the most part, I'm quite disciplined. But whether you're disciplined or not disciplined, I like the fact that at the moment on Thursday morning, I have to send my release, my piece, on Thursday morning before 12 o'clock. That's it. She's counting on me. And there's a spot in the newspaper which is reserved, and she's not going to. And I have a moral obligation or personal obligation to meet that deadline. I like deadlines like that. Otherwise, there's so many. I'm fascinated by so much stuff, and I'd be really sidetracked. Not to waste time, but really to read other things that are not related, or to say, well, how about reading more widely than just focusing on business? And we'll talk about that a little later on. But I think that the discipline of knowing that every Thursday morning before 12 o'clock, she has to have a proofread copy of a piece that people will wish to read. And so that I like that deadline. And being Bruce's show is almost, I've always got 4 books that I say to his producer, which one do you like best? Or which one will Bruce like most? But they're always there. I think that the anchor part is the newspaper work, is writing something each week for the paper.
Fantastic. It reminds me of a saying, or not really a saying, but an explanation that I heard recently, the difference between a goal and a wish.
Yes.
A wish is, I want to achieve it someday. A goal has a deadline to it. And so goal-driven.
There is something about deadlines on newspapers. They really take their deadlines quite seriously.
Absolutely. And other interesting facts that kind of the 700 books, anything like really stand out in your mind as aha moments or things that you think would be of value to us?
This is the value. There is absolutely no excuse, none, for any human being to read a book in a week. I think there's at some level I will have to answer to somebody for why I did that and how I could be so insulting to the author. Let me just put this in perspective. You authored books, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you write a book, you've probably had 2 or 3 or 4 years experience getting your ideas together, collecting them, working them out. And then you say, I need to put this in the book. And then you think, well, that won't take long. I'll knock it off in 2 months, working on Sundays. Of course, it never works. It's a year and you work far more than Sundays. Then you hand it over to your editor. Then that's another 3 months. And then by the time the books come out, you've probably put 2 or 3 years of thinking into that book. No human being should insult you by reading it in 1 week. When people ask me how many books should you read, my figuring is I would suggest that the normal human being who's not obsessed, who's got a normal life, who does real things, what he should do is read no more than 4 books a year. That's only 4. And which 4? Look at Ian Mann. He's a nutcase. He reads a lot, and you'll be able to get a précis of a lot of books. Look at which one's right for you, and then read that book, but learn it and write on the side and talk to people about it and pick the best stories and see how it can apply. Somebody put a lot of work into that. And if it's a good guy and he's smart, it's worth reading very slowly, maybe even reading again. And when the book is done, it should look like somebody has really done hard work on this book. And 4 books a year, that's a university education, and it costs you nothing, 250 Rand per book or whatever, and you can read the finest ideas of the finest authors in the world in your field for 250 Rand. We can't take our course with them at that price.
So how do you choose which books you review? Because I don't know the numbers, but there must be hundreds of books that come out.
Hundreds of thousands.
Thousands of books. And how do you choose which ones? And do you ever start reading and think, no, this is somebody just hashing somebody else's work, and put it aside? I recently my topic's behavioral economics, and I've been disappointed that I've bought a couple of books and it's just rehashed work of the first book I read.
Yes.
So do you ever halfway through say, I'm not reading any further? And how do you choose with you? It's a few more books. It's 48 books a year approximately. But how do you choose which are those 48? And again, do you ever put them aside and say, sorry, not reading any further?
The answer to the first question, yes. The beauty of getting Kindles, buying books on Kindle, is that they send you a chapter. So I will go through a chapter, and sometimes not even the whole chapter, but you can look at the index, look at the first chapter, and say, I don't think so. I don't think he's saying anything interesting, and this doesn't look like it's well researched. I have a predilection for academic books, books written by academics. The nice thing about business is that generally you generally find that professors at good universities are required to talk to business people. They're not academics in the sense that a philosopher of history is an academic. These people are used to talking to business people, so they write easily and they make it relevant. So I like books written by business school teachers. Aside from them, the other people I seem to enjoy are journalists from fine magazines. I mentioned to you Tim Harford's book on numbers just the other day, and how to make sense of the world using numbers. Tim Harford is an experienced Financial Times journalist. Now, somebody like that you're pretty sure that if he's writing, it's going to be intelligent, and it's going to be thoughtful, and it's going to be well. So I sort of cull books in that direction, but every now and then I like to read some book by a practitioner. And the only area that I consistently find a book is in sales. And I'll tell you why. I cannot think of any profession where sales is irrelevant. Not one. It doesn't matter whether you're running a law firm, whether you're running a consultancy, whether you're running your own business. Understanding the nature of sales is a very, very important part of it. Whether you actually ever stand in front of a client trying to sell him anything, or you're worried about your own people going out there and selling. So at least once a year, I always find one book that I like on sales, and I review that.
Fantastic. We've got a question on the chat from Odette Lifshitz, who says, "What do you say to people that think they know it all and do not choose to learn from books?"
My gut feeling is, what a shame. I think that if there's one characteristic, and let me double back, Edgar Schein is a professor of industrial psychology and industrial sociology. He was at MIT. He's written well. He's like one of the doyens of the field. His last book, his second to last book was called Humble Inquiry. And I'd love to share this with you. He said that it was his most important work he's ever done. And this is a man who's written and is well respected in his field. Essentially, the book is about this. He said he'd done some studies on disasters in the world. And when he said there's one common factor that happened that underlay all the disasters, whether it was a plane crashing or an oil spill, or anything like that, or a shuttle. He said the people lower down knew it was going to happen, and they didn't say a word. And you ask yourself, why would I put myself in jeopardy and not say what I'm seeing? There's too much ice on the wings. We can't take off. Why don't I say that? When you work for somebody who knows it all, you're working for a fool, and an arrogant fool, and those are the most dangerous types. He talks about humble inquiry. Humble inquiry is not where you don't say, I know what. My favorite example of this, if you don't mind, quite a few people I'm sure have heard this. I want you to picture he's from Boston. I want you to picture an operating theater in Boston. And in the operating theater, the cardiac surgeon says to the people around him, he says, we haven't worked together, so I need to introduce myself. I'm probably one of the finest cardiac surgeons in Boston. I'll put my skills against absolutely everybody. I graduated from Harvard. I've got 2 postdocs, and I've written 3 peer-reviewed papers. That's me. So, Nursey, listen up, please. If you see anything you think I should know about, I'd like you to tell me, Nursey. I'd like you to tell me. But please, I do not want you wasting my time. And you there with anesthetics, please keep me alert. Let me know what's going on. But once again, do not interrupt me or waste my time. How many suggestions do you think Nursey is going to give him? Absolutely nothing, especially if he calls her Nursey. If he stood up in front of them and said, listen, we don't know each other, so let me just introduce myself. I'm probably one of the finest surgeons in Boston, and I will put my skill against anybody else. I hold 3 postdocs. I graduated from Harvard School, and I've written 3 peer-reviewed papers. Nurse, that's me. I have never, ever studied nursing. I don't even really understand what you do and what your responsibilities are. You handling the technology on the side there, I don't even know how the thing works. I just rely on you giving me the information. And you in anesthetics, I studied anesthesia, but I can't remember anything it was as an undergraduate. I need your help. I need your help. I promise you I will focus on my part and I'll do my part to the best of my ability, but I really, really need you to help me. The man in front of us has to leave in better condition than he came in. And it's up to all of us. So please, I'll do what I can do. I need all of you. That is a humble man. That's a humble man. And my figuring is that people who are not humble will not find out what's going on in their own companies. As Dick Falk, I mean, that's that perfect example, the guy who messed up Lehman's. He was so arrogant, people were terrified of him, and they used to judge by the clothes he was wearing, what mood he is in. Everybody, nothing came through. Nothing came through. And my figuring is that if you are Jamie Dimond, his company did extraordinarily well because he had the person responsible for risk directly talking to him. The risk manager reported directly into him. He was fully aware of what's going on. They didn't get into trouble. Where people don't feel that, where the system doesn't allow you to talk to people, you're dealing with an arrogant person and they're hugely dangerous.
So to reiterate that, I read something recently about airplane crashes, that it happened with different cultures. So if somebody is growing up in a culture where it's wrong to talk to somebody more senior, that actually led to more accidents because, as you're saying, people are scared to highlight issues because it's not my space to mention it, even though it is. And related to that, from a business point of view, companies like Steinhoff, where the person was arrogant, people didn't feel that they could start reporting things that are wrong, purely because of that attitude you're just talking about.
You know, when Korean Airlines had the worst air record, I mean, they actually crashed into barriers at Heathrow, and the whole thing. If you're Korean, you don't talk straight to people. I would never, if you were my senior, I would never invite you for dinner. I would say to you, perhaps sir would be interested in having dinner this evening. And they'd say, yes, I would be. He said, sir, maybe sir would be happy if I arranged his dinner for him. He said, yes, I would be happy. And perhaps sir would be appreciative of whether I could take him to his dinner. He said, hey mate, do you want to have dinner with me, right? Now, imagine, you're in a cockpit and you can't talk directly. Korean doesn't allow you to do that. They realized that the culture was so thick of this hierarchy that they just couldn't talk to people. Eventually, the only way that they solved this problem, and they had such a bad air record that the Canadians refused to allow them to fly over their airspace, if they'd get act together. And the only way it changed was they made a rule that no one is allowed to speak English in a Korean plane if they want a job in 6 months. You're only allowed to speak English, nothing else. Because in English you can say, listen up, mate, there's ice on the wings. Listen up, mate. You can't say that in Korean. It just doesn't have the vocabulary. So you're absolutely right. We have to, and that's why it's called humble inquiry. We've got to get people to want to tell us stuff. My figuring is where you find clients, and there's a lot of people at the heads of big companies who know why they're there. They're there at the heads of big companies because they know everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. And because of that arrogance, they make a lot of mistakes. In fact, there's a lot of work being done recently on questioning. And Gregerson, oddly enough, Gregerson's also from MIT. Gregerson talks about the head of an organization today has got to be chief question asker, not chief answer giver. The world is far too complicated for that. And he said that at one of the seminars he was giving to heads of very large companies, one man afterwards stood up and said to him, I got where I got only because I'm the go-to guy who always has the answers. And now you're telling me I'm supposed to be chief questioner. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. Albert Einstein said, famously, he said, if I have an existential problem and I have only 1 hour to answer that existential means life-threatening problem, right? And I have 1 hour to answer it. He said, I'll take 55 minutes formulating the correct question. 55 minutes. Because when I've got the correct question, I'll answer it in 5 minutes. And I think that one of the things that leaders need to get good at today more than ever in human history is you have got to be chief question asker. And if you haven't got, if you aren't really skilled, I'll give you in 2 seconds how you go about doing it. Toyota, the man who started Toyota, used to ask the 5 whys. Why? Then you give him an answer. So why do you have a Jewish day school? Because you want to educate people into Judaism. Why do you want to educate people into Judaism? Because we want continuity. Why do you think continuity will come through education? And you keep asking and asking and asking. You ask why 5 times. Trust me, you're going to get there. But the thing is, everybody who leads anything must become a better questioner. Answer givers are not terribly good. And there's a Chinese saying that none of us is as smart as all of us. But if all of us are not being asked to participate, it doesn't matter how big the quorum is. So you have to get everybody there to participate, and asking questions is more important than giving answers.
That's fantastic. I've often said that the answer often depends on the question, the way the question is asked.
Absolutely, yeah. Ask the wrong question, you get the wrong answer.
Correct. And Ariella would like you to share a little bit on your thoughts of the years ahead of us in terms of Corona and how it's impacting our lives and the economy in general.
Okay. You're going to have to bear with me through this preamble. There are 3, possibly 4 types. There are 3 types of popular news sources. One is Bloomberg. Let's look at finance. That's just finance. In finance, you've got Bloomberg. It's rolling news. They tell you the stock market movements and analysis of that literally every second of every single day. That's rolling news. Then what you have is a daily newspaper. A daily newspaper. And that'll give you the highlights of the day. Now at 11:23, I want to tell you that at 11:23, based on what happened at 11:21, there was an incredible headline. But by the time the paper went out that night, it's not a headline, something else is. If you take, so you've got Bloomberg, you've got the Financial Times, and then you've got The Economist. The Economist is a once-a-week newspaper. What you will read in once a week might be nothing that appeared as a headline on Tuesday, because by Friday it was not relevant anymore, and something more interesting evolved, or something we learned more about came to the fore. So I think one of the things we need to understand is we have to have a perspective on things. And it may be fascinating, if you ever wanted to try this, to read last week's newspaper every week for a year. And then you'll see whether you think that this thing about reading newspapers was such a good idea in the first place. But it has its own purpose, and it has its own reasons. But if you have a look at what you want, if you look at something like rolling news, rolling news is quite different from what news would be if you were looking at over a period of time. I would imagine that if you had to look now and you had to write a review of where the world is, and you said 700 million, I'll say that again, 700 million people today live in abject poverty. 700 million. Now, if you write that today, it's scary beyond belief. Let's say that the newspaper came out once every 100 years. The idea that 700 people are still living in poverty would be cause for celebration. Cause for celebration 100 years later. Because 100 years ago, everybody lived on $1.50 a day. Everyone, with the exception of one or two people, relatively. Humanity was living on that. So if I said you 700 people in the newspaper that comes out once every 100 years, it would be celebratory, almost cause for public holiday. When so we need to take a view on what's happening to us now. So I think that's the first important point. Second important point is this. I think that the skills that we need to run our companies are very, very, very different. If I can just give you one example. There's a difference between complicated and complex. Let's look at a complicated system. A complicated system is a factory. You look at the Ford factory, and every single year since Henry Ford started, it got more and more complicated. The machinery is more complicated. The different things that went on were more complicated. The methods were more complicated. But you can still work with complication. You can understand it, and you can become more efficient. Then there's complexity. Complexity is nightmarishly bewildering. Here's a good example. The Bank of England issued a statement, and they said, there will definitely be another financial crisis. So don't think the financial crisis has gone away from everything we've done. But they can't tell you why, and they can't tell you when, despite the fact that they announced that. So you might say, well, they don't have data. Nonsense. They've got more data than probably anybody on the planet except a bank that size. With that, maybe they're not smart. They are extraordinarily smart. And when they couldn't find a local person smart enough to run the bank, they had to bring in a Canadian. They don't care where you come from. They just want the smartest minds in the world there. They don't know when, and they don't know why. And the reason is because the world is not complicated. That would be easy. It's complex. Little things have outsized results. An insane human being who somehow either got into the White House and tweets in the middle of the night, complete garbage, can change the movements in the stock market. Because he got annoyed by something or other, he can cancel an investment in health at the time of a pandemic. It is beyond belief, but it can happen. Supply chains are so complex today. This idea of we're going to cut the Chinese out, don't be silly. Of course you can't cut them out. Half the world is based on their technologies embedded so deeply in the system that you can't possibly eradicate Chinese out of anything. But a small little thing, because the supply chains are so complex, in order to keep costs down, a riot in a town that you've never heard of can disrupt that. A strike somewhere can disrupt that. A hurricane can disrupt it. So there's so many little things that can go wrong and destroy big things. No one person, no one country, no one economy, no one area controls everything. Everything is controlled by a lunatic, a deranged president who tweets in the middle of the night. It's that subtle. So we're living in a complex environment, and we have to think very, very differently. The skills of leadership today have to take into account complexity as opposed to complication, which is what we did in the past. In the past, a leader was supposed to work out what the future is, work out his plan, and manage his plan, and come up with everything correct. The fact is, if that ever was true, it's just naive today. So that's the first part. You have to manage businesses differently. Second thing is, we have to think differently about the future for two reasons. One is the future's coming fast. It's coming faster than it used to come. That's the one side. But it's not unknowable. And this is important. The future is not unknowable. I always thought that the future was, it's not here. So how can we know about it? We can know about it, and I'll tell you why. The future is here already, but not evenly spread. Let me give you just two examples. The future of retailing has already been put into place in the United States in the Amazon Go shop. It's only a convenience store, but you can walk into that convenience store with your phone. You put your phone on the turnstile. It opens the turnstile. You walk in. You put your phone back in your pocket. You walk around the store and just pick up whatever you want. You can put it in your pocket. You can put it in your bag. Don't bother putting it in a trolley because it's a convenience store. And then what you do when you need to leave, you don't stand in a queue. Just walk straight out the door. And then you look at your phone. It'll tell you what you took, how much it cost you, and it's now on your Amazon account. Now, that is where the future is. It's not everywhere, but it gives you a hint of what the future is. It's not the first world. You mustn't make any mistakes. Only the first world has neat stuff. M-Peso is a way of sending money to people who don't have bank accounts. That's Kenyan. It was invented by Kenyans, if I'm not mistaken. Now we're finding the future of banking, the future of retailing in some places. It's just not spread all over. What you need to do is we need to understand the future. And you won't understand the future on your own. It's very useful to get groups of people in a guided discussion. I'm doing quite a lot of this at the moment, so I'm quite excited about it. You need to help people in guided discussions make an impressionistic picture of the future, but not 2 years. The what I'm engaged in right now is 7 years ahead. The company's $1 billion turnover, so it's a big one, and they're thinking 7 years ahead. Why are they doing that? Is because they say if we are so busy with our day jobs now that we can't spend time doing all this stuff. So I've organized. I know now that you can do this in short little bursts of 1.5 hours, maybe every 2 weeks. It's just very manageable. But from that, you'll be able to say, in 7 years' time, this is what the world we work in is probably going to look like. Not accurately, but pretty probably. We're not going to go back to stores where they have checkouts and where somebody fills your bag for you. It's not going to happen. It's going to evolve closer and closer to Amazon. Now, if I know that it's going to, what must I start working on today? So when I finally look up, I don't see that we are 7 years behind or 2 years behind. And why did you look up? Because your nearest competitor is now eating your lunch because he thought ahead or he stumbled upon it, or because some little startup from the middle of absolutely nowhere is coming and eating your lunch. So in order you have to start thinking, what will that picture in the future look like? And then work backwards and say, terrific, what do I do today? So I think those are the two responses that we have. One becoming your leadership has to be very different and your method of strategy has to be very different. But they're not impossible, all there.
Fantastic. Now, Ian, we've heard that saying, life begins at 40.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of from a personal point of view. I think your belief is that your business life begins again at 60. So I know that you're now getting involved in a couple of businesses and startups. Yes. Tracy made a comment about she'd like to hear some of your ventures from the 1960s. So how did it evolve from then to now? And on the topic of the talk, why do you really believe that you might be too young to start, but you're really too old to start? How can you now, at the age of 60, when that used to be the end of days?
Yes.
how can now you start afresh? And why do you believe so strongly in it?
Two reasons. One is there has never ever been, statistically we know that older people are not dumber than younger people. Let me just put that in perspective. When Zuckerberg was young, he stood up at Stanford, and gave a talk, and he said, listen, let's face it, younger people are just smarter. Well, and he's a billionaire, multi-billionaire, who's built an enormous organization, and he's a youngster. What the subtext, which we're not really aware of, but it'll take you 2 seconds to get aware of it. Do you really believe that some Silicon Valley investor who had hundreds of millions of dollars said, I like your face, boy. I like what you're saying. You're a clever little chap. I'm going to give you $10 million to go and spend and waste. Absolutely not. You may be sure that those investors had him as tightly as they possibly could, so tight he probably couldn't breathe. He was under adult supervision all the time. And I think that we mustn't fool ourselves. All the youngsters who made it were under adult supervision, and thank God they were, because they were blown all the investors' money if they hadn't been. So that's first off. Second off, the mistake that young people are better at starting businesses is not only a myth, it's factually and completely wrong. A study was done on when businesses were founded. Now, when you found a business, you have to register. So from the time registration of businesses started in the United States till today, the average age of starting a business from when it started in the 1800s, when they start registering, to today is around 45. Starting a founder of a business. A founder of a successful business, now that's different. A successful business tends to be, because it depends on the type of business you're in, tends to be anywhere from 46 to 55. Now, there's a very good reason. I mean, just the reason's so obvious. If you've been around business for the last 20 years, you know something a lot more than a 20-year-old could possibly know, no matter how smart he is. So you've got knowledge. Second thing, you've got two other things. You probably, when you get older, have a spot of money. So you've got access to capital, which in all probability, a 20-year-old doesn't have. So he starts begging, and mainly from older people who've been around and done it. And the third thing you've got is you have social capital. People know you, and you know people. It must not be underestimated, and I say this very sincerely. The difference between the rich and the poor is not that the rich have money and the poor don't. It's that the groups of rich people have access to other people who know stuff, not money, who know stuff, and can put them onto people who know things that the poor never have. The poor are floundering. The rich have those connections which allow them to do it, and that's a huge advantage. Okay. So firstly, you need capital, you need social capital, and you need experience. So that's why I think it's better. However, should you hang around until you're old? And the answer is, I don't think so. I think that if you want to be an entrepreneur, there's a model of understanding business that I think you need to know, investing in businesses that you need to know. Business works on 3 cogs. The smallest cog turns terribly fast. And because it turns terribly fast all the time, every day, it's able to turn a much larger cog, which might only turn every month or every quarter, which turns an even bigger cog, which might turn every year or every 2. Everybody in business has to worry about building their smallest cog. What is it that's going to give me money every day that will allow me to save some, which eventually I'll be able to invest, but at least I'm able to pay my bills, I'm able to educate my kids, I'm able to put food on my table. If that is not spinning, you will have to miss fantastic opportunities because you just don't have the luxury of being able to get involved in them. When you have the luxury, because every single day you're making money every single day, then you can worry about your second cog, which is where money is made maybe monthly or bi-monthly, usually in bigger quantities, which will allow you eventually to look for that one big thing that's going to blow the lights out and make a lot of money every year or 2 or 3. It may be the investment in building. It may be investment in something that will take 5 years to actually give you a decent return. You bought a building, you wait for the property market to go up, the neighborhood changed, all good things happened, you revamped the place a little bit, and 8 years later, you sold it for 3 times what you paid for it. You would never have been able to make 3 times that number of millions in 8 years any other way but you had to have the money to buy that in the first place. So I think it's important to think in terms of those 3 wheels. And if you get them right, it'll work. I think that the most important thing in business, if you had to ask what's the acumen that's required in business generally, I would say the acumen is noticing opportunities. Noticing opportunities. If you are a religious soul, let me share the story with you because I think it's illustrative. There's a very holy man, and they realize that the flood is coming and the rains won't stop. And one of his neighbors takes his little rowboat and says, "Come by." He says, "Joe, jump in." Joe says, "I'm a man who believes in God. I believe in God, and I hope God believes in me. I've spent my whole life with God. Thanks very much. I don't need the ride." The boat goes off because there was water on his first floor. Eventually, he's in the second floor, and it's still raining. And a speedboat comes by, and the loud hailer says, come on out. We'll take you to safety. Come on out." And he shouts back, "I believe in God. I'm a religious man. Thanks very much. I'm going to take a miss on this one." Eventually, he's hanging onto the chimney because the water's up to the roof. And a helicopter with a ladder comes down and says, grab the ladder now." And he says, I'm a religious man. I believe in God. Thank you. That's it. And then, of course, he drowns. He gets up to heaven and he says, "Lord, how could you do this to me? How could you let me down so badly after all the faith I put in you?" And God responds, "Let you down? A boat? A speedboat? And a helicopter? I let you down?" I think that we see boats, speedboats, and helicopters all the time. If we don't take the opportunities that come there, keep our eyes open and take the opportunities that come, don't be surprised if somebody else gets all the opportunities and poor you get nothing. There are opportunities abound in all sorts of places. Keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and just eyes wide open. There's got to be stuff around there.
Do you want to share some of that stuff around there that you personally involved in, or would you prefer?
Just at a high level, if you don't mind. I started off, my small cog has always been gateways. Gateways has allowed me to have a business. It's a reasonable business. It's been really reasonably successful. It's my playground. I love it more than anything else. It never became a great business in the sense that we never became another Ernst & Young. And there was a very good reason. My heart wasn't in it. And that's quite an important thing. My heart was not into building that into a business, because the person needed to do that doesn't need to know anything about consulting. He just has to want to build a business. I wanted to consult. But consulting was my small wheel, kept spinning and it's been spinning. It's allowed me over time to get involved in a small property, which has been very useful to me. It allowed me to do that. But that was a bigger wheel. They wouldn't give any returns for quite a while. Of late, I stumbled into, in ways that are beyond belief, how I actually got there, into getting involved in beneficiary tracing. We now have a company which traces people who have not been found, but who are owed money, either in share schemes or their pensions or their provident funds. They're owed money. People have tried to find them and they haven't been able to find them. We've gotten very, very good. This company has gotten extraordinarily good at finding people that nobody else can find. So we get engaged by pension and provident funds and share schemes to find people that other people can't find. And what we do is we are able to find them and get them connected with the companies so that they can get their entitlements. Now, how I found that business, the story is too bizarre. The person who introduced me to the business phoned me and asked if he could consult me on how to build a tracing business of a kind. Not debt tracing, but this beneficiary tracing. I said I'd like to do that. He was very inarticulate. I said we had an appointment. He didn't make the appointment because it turns out he didn't have bus fare. He had absolutely nothing. But what he did was he introduced me to this whole thing of beneficiary tracing. And I realized that we could change human beings' lives by getting money to the people it belonged to, who sometimes didn't know they were entitled to it or had no way of getting it. And these are people, poor people, often in rural areas that can't be found. We started that business, and I was able to invest in it, and it went belly up. It was a complete fiasco. But I realized that the thing was good, and that the model, the idea was good. It just needed a new model. And when we revamped it and redid the strategy, it's turned into a very nice and very successful company. Now, I didn't even know that there was such a thing called beneficiary tracing. I had no idea that some people can't be found. It just was, they had nothing. I know debt collectors is something else, because people are dodging and trying to hide from debt collectors. And we never wanted to get into there. We want to be the good guys. So we positioned ourselves. If you ever get a telephone call from Gateway's Tracing Services, it's Father Christmas calling. It's not somebody who wants to take away money that you don't have. So that business has turned out to be a lovely business and a very exciting one. The other business I got involved in was also, everything in my life is mistakes. I could not have planned this stuff. So think that you can plan the forwards. I don't believe people who tell me that. All of my life doesn't say that that's what happened. Mine were all mistakes. A man comes, a Brit and an Iranian come to see me, and they want me to write a strategy and a business plan for them. They want to start manufacturing incubators for householders to take eggs, put them in there, and they come out little chicks 21 days later. They can't afford my fees. And so they said, well, would you like to invest in it? And I said, no, I don't think so. I'm vegetarian, so I'm not into that stuff. And so I said, no, I'll pass on this. But as I thought about it, it looked good. And they came back to me and said, please come in. So I said to them, I'll come in at half my fee if you give me the rights of first refusal to the second round of funding. They said they would love that. As I got more and more into this and helped them develop the strategy, one thing became absolutely clear, that we were sitting on a gold mine, absolute gold mine, but not in what they thought they wanted, which is not unusual. Startups constantly mutate from one thing to another. And this was mutating from being a householder's hatcheries to building hatcheries of the sort that Rainbow Chickens has, or Astral has. Huge things. They're bigger than many buildings put together. And I realized that there was something in this. So at the moment that the British guy said, look, I need out. I live too far away. I'm not involved. I said, I'll grab it. I bought his equity. And that is going to be a very, very fine business. It's a long-term business. I've been working in it for 2 years already. It'll probably take another year before it shows a cent of profit. So if you can't get the big wheel unless you've got the medium-sized wheel going already. And you can't get the medium-sized wheel unless you've got the little wheel going. But the key is keep your eyes open. There's all sorts of opportunities available to you. And it's just watching for those things and being very, very careful which of all the shiny things all around you are worth picking up and which should be just left exactly where they are because they're not worth much.
Wow, Ian, thank you. So a couple of things that I've picked up from your talk is, first of all, noticing those opportunities. It's spinning the small wheel so that when the opportunity of the big wheel comes about, that you have the ability to implement it. To appreciate that we have access to people that know stuff. That's crucial. Looking at the complicated versus the complex, and also that 5 why, asking the 5 why, getting to the root cause of that. So first of all, I want to thank you tremendously for sharing this knowledge, but it's not over yet, because I want to open it up for anybody to unmute their mics if they have a question or want to ask you something. If anybody wants to, please unmute your mic if you can, put on your camera, and let's open the floor to questions. But Ian, thank you so much for sharing what you've shared so far.
Thank you.
Anybody out there who wants to ask Ian a question directly?
Ian, it's Helene. Hi. Ian, if you were looking for businesses of the future, where would you look? And where would you, as an investor, where would you invest?
It's a very, very profound question, and I'll tell you why. The knee-jerk reaction of most people is the world, if it's a horrible cliche, but they say the world used to be driven on oil, now it's driven on data. That sounds very nice, it's very glib. The reality is we are still going to need barbers. We're definitely still going to need barbers. We're still going to need chefs, and we're still going to need our clothes cleaned. And we're going to need our houses cleaned. You can get a Roomba machine that might vacuum your place, but you're going to need other things as well. My figuring is that there's opportunities absolutely everywhere. There are some things I think which have bigger opportunities than others. I think that if you were somebody who cleaned carpets for people, if you're in the exotics, you'll always be a business for you. If you aren't in exotics, don't worry. That'll probably go away, because there'll probably be an automatic machine that you plug in, and it just, when you're out of the room, it just moves around, vacuums the place, shampoos the place, and then cleans it up afterwards. So there's some things which have opportunities, and some things which will have small opportunities unless it's very niche. But I think that people must just keep their eyes wide open. I don't think that the future is going to be very different. We're all still going to eat food. We're still all going to marry. We're still all going to celebrate. We're still going to wear clothes. There's still a lot of things I think that we can, but it'll be different. So I don't think there's any area that you shouldn't look in. But the question you should ask yourself is, how long do I think that will last if we evolve in the way that we are evolving? I hope that answers your question, Eileen.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Anybody else with a question? So Ian, I'm going to ask one last question then myself. Sure. It's not, I personally don't like it when somebody asks for the one thing, but I'm going to ask you, of all the books that you've read, maybe not the one thing, but the theme that comes through of all of those, what should we keep in mind other than what you've shared with us already? What kind of message would be that golden thread that you think that goes through all of these books?
It's a non-business answer, but I think it is. I think it is important. I read a book many years ago, must have been about 2013, 2012. What the man was talking about there was he's talking about the modern currency of effectiveness. And he said that we had time management, and we all courses in time management. You know, Dave Allen and everybody said, really complicated. How can you squeeze more stuff into one day? And he said, that's cute. The real thing is energy management. Energy management. This is the thing. You can manage your time absolutely perfectly, and you can try and pack as much as you can into it, but you have to be able to manage your energy. And your energy comes from a lot of different places. First off, when I was growing up, and I hope this myth has been dispelled, but I don't believe it has, We used to believe that he who sleeps least is showing two things. So if you worked for any of the big accounting firms or any of the big strategy firms, if you say, I pulled an all-nighter last night, they say, I also do that every now and then. I just have to, we can't cope any other way. Somebody once said to me, the only reason they pull all-nighters is because they don't work during the day. But the fact is, we now know that pulling an all-nighter is not a sign of commitment, and it's not a sign of fortitude. It's a sign of stupidity. We know that human beings need to sleep. What goes on in your brain when you're sleeping, now we know about. We can accept that people in the past didn't talk like this because we didn't have all the fMRIs. We just didn't have the stuff that could prove to us how important sleep is. If you are sleep deprived, two things go wrong. People who are sleep deprived make worse decisions than people who are not. On the superficial level, I'll get the deeper level in a moment. They're also not able to tell the difference between a good idea or a bad idea. That's been proven. Of course, if you are sleep deprived, there are more accidents, more deaths from road accidents from sleep deprivation than there are from drugs and alcohol put together in the United States. You have to manage your energy at the physical level of sleep. Second thing is, if your body is deprived of real nutrients, and having a lunch bar at lunch, that's my favorite chocolate. Having a lunch bar at lunch is not a substitute for lunch. And human beings have got to eat properly, and they've got to sleep properly. And proper food is a very simple rule about food. I picked up in a book en passant. He said, if you want to avoid heart attacks, obesity, and any of the other lifestyle diseases, there are three things you've got to know about your diet. It's a formula for dieting. Number one, eat food. If it can be passed through a window, it's not food. If you can't explain, if a child cannot read the ingredients on the side of the box, it's not food. And if your grandmother wouldn't recognize it, it's not food. Eat food. Number one, mainly plants and not too much. Now, if you followed that prescription, that he believes, and there's a lot of reasons why, of course, people say, of course, that's true. It'll keep your weight down, it'll keep your body, keep you fat. So you need that. You need sleep and you need to eat. But you also need a basic amount of exercise. And the basic amount of exercise, whether it's your 1,000 steps a day or it's going to gym every second day for half an hour and just getting your blood pressure up to a reasonable level, we have to worry about keeping our bodies strong. Otherwise, we can't do what we need to do. The last part is your body can be in beautiful shape. Your diet can be absolutely perfect. And you sleep well. If you and your partner don't talk to each other, your life partner, or you and your kids can't get on with each other, and you have no friends, all the other stuff will be ruined. We need to see to it that we have a good social structure, a supportive, caring social structure. Having friends has been proven. There's a thing called the men's study. It's one of the longest longitudinal studies. It was done, I think, on Harvard men, because they didn't have women at Harvard at the time. And the ones that had the best quality life and lived the longest had more friends. Friends are important. And it's so easy for us to ignore our friends when times are tough. But it's often when times are tough that we need them most. We need to nurture our primary relationship as the most precious gift we have, and we need to nurture our circle of friends. My feeling is that if you can handle your body, your exercise, your food, your sleep, your friendships, your life, I think, could not, depending on your predilection, could be enriched by having a spiritual life as well. I think that if you have that cluster of things together, now we can start talking about how to build a great business. If you don't have those ones, you could start building great business, but somebody else will buy it because you're too sick to run it, or you make mistakes, or there's nothing left and you missed cues because you just were tired and made mistakes, or you're unhealthy. So I think that if the machine doesn't work, the machine that drives your enterprise doesn't work, don't be surprised if the enterprise doesn't work well. So I think it's a good place to start.
Wow, that's a good place to start. And I think this is a fantastic place to end. Really, this has been exceptional. And I'm going to hand over to Tracy to thank you. But really, I feel like we could do this at least once a week. So maybe this is another thing you put on your list. Thank you so much, Ian. And Tracy, you're on mute at the moment. So if you can unmute, and over to you.
David, thank you so much. I think sessions like this morning is really just makes me as an individual and part of ORT Jet feel so privileged to spend time in the company of yourself and Ian Mann, and what an incredible in the boardroom session. I think most definitely one of the best we've had, especially on Zoom, as we've only had one other. But in between our session this morning, the comments coming through, like how people have enjoyed this and the value that they have received from it. We are just so incredibly grateful to you both for having you on board as part of the ORT Jet team to help us, guide us, facilitate such incredible sessions. I actually felt like I was part of a newsroom, and it was so prestigious on Zoom this morning. So thank you so much. We're so grateful. We are going to put up a brief poll. If anyone is able to make a donation to ORT Jet, please would you consider doing so? As you know, we are a non-profit organization and rely heavily on the funding that we receive from the community, from people who join our webinars, to allow us to continue what we do. We thank you for that. And again, Ian, I'm sure Ariella wants to thank you, and David too. I thank you so much for this morning. It was exceptional. Thank you so much.